Hey guys, Kino Corner here. A lot of you asked for this, so here you go. My review on Megalopolis. I have no idea where to start with this review. I mean, I went to the cinema a few nights ago with the idea that, I'd watch the film, take down some notes after the screening, and then write it the next morning. But a couple days later, it's still hard for me to put all my thoughts together coherently. I had been excited for this movie for quite some time. It might possibly be Coppola's final film, and he self-funded it and supposedly had full creative control. Maybe it could serve as an aging filmmaker's final magnum opus, a grand return to form. The reviews from Cannes just excited me more. Distributors couldn't make heads or tails of the film, and it left audiences incredibly divided. I think I get more excited about divisive films than I do about movies that everyone agrees are good or are bad. I want to jump in the discourse and just ride the chaos. So needless to say, this was my most anticipated film of the year. I didn't really think that it would be my favorite film of the year, but I knew that the movie would give me an experience that no other film this year could. I booked the earliest IMAX showing I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the special screening a few days prior, and I braced myself for something special. I wasn't prepared. Not at all. Gosh, how do we structure this review? I guess we can start with the story, which isn't exactly super robust, and I don't think people's memories about the film are story related, but here goes. An architect and genius inventor, Caesar Catalina, played by Adam Driver, has developed this futuristic building material and plans to build a utopia in the center of New Rome, which is what New York is called here. He faces opposition, though, from the mayor, Francis Cicero, played by Giancarlo Esposito. Mayor Cicero, he's kind of a neoconservative, and he's fine with continuing things how they currently are, but as we can see, not all is well in New Rome. Debauchery and degeneracy fill the streets and nightclubs of the city, all while working-class people and immigrants find it harder and harder to live there. There's a growing social unrest that Cicero doesn't seem to be able to handle.
He's picking up a large popular constituency. He's some kind of genius. He can fuck everything.
You handle this, Nash.
Caesar's cousin Claudio, played by Shia LaBeouf, seeks power and wants to destroy Caesar. So he plots to ruin Caesar's reputation and rile up the angry masses to foment a coup. Caesar and Claudio are both related to Hamilton Crassus III, played by Jon Voight, who is the wealthiest man in New Rome and the head of the bank. They both try to curry his favor or manipulate him to achieve their opposing visions for the future of New Rome. All while this is happening, Mayor Cicero's daughter Julia, played by Natalie Emmanuel, becomes enamored with Caesar after watching him stop time, and so goes to work for him.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Their work relationship quickly becomes the main love story of the film. Of course, since Cicero and Caesar are bitter rivals, Cicero disapproves of this union and does whatever he can to cause them to break up. Oh yeah, Caesar can stop time whenever he wants, although the time-stopping ability never really plays much of a role in the plot. It's really only used to heighten the melodrama of some scenes.
Emmy, time stop now.
And one last major through line, Wow Platinum, Aubrey Plaza's character. She starts off as Caesar's mistress, but seduces Caesar's uncle Crassus to get her hands on his wealth and try to become the most powerful woman in the city.
You and I ought to have an understanding. You're on my territory now, and you're gonna play by my rules.
There are a bunch of other small stories that seem to begin and end without much consequence to the rest of the film. Some of these stories include Claudio, dressed in drag, implicating Caesar as having had relations with a minor on the big stage. But that story wraps up in what felt like less than 5 minutes, and the events of it are never again discussed in the film. Another story that felt like it went nowhere was a subplot about a Soviet satellite hurtling towards Earth. It's supposed to be this apocalyptic event, and yet, after that little subplot ends, everything is seemingly back to normal. Let's talk about the aesthetics. It has a very digital look, and the impressiveness of the visuals, it varies widely. Some shots are genuinely beautiful, others look like Amazon Prime TV shows, and still others look like shots from Neil Breen movies. The worst visuals were usually due to bad digital backdrops. The characters in the foreground were sometimes just not blended all that well into the background, or vice versa. Some of the shots at the Colosseum reminded me of the rehabilitation scene from Idiocracy. Now, while I do love Idiocracy, its computer-generated visuals weren't the best. There were also parts in the film in which Coppola would superimpose multiple people and sets onto the screen at once that the other people in the audience didn't seem to care for, but I actually liked. Those parts reminded me of classic Hollywood films, and I'm sure that's what he was going for. There would also be these strange fantasy sequences in which the characters would walk around in an imagined world. Again, they weren't composited into the worlds very well, and it's very jarring, making me wonder how this film cost $120 million to produce. The other aspects of the aesthetic is the design of the characters, sets, and lighting. Gold fills the screen in many of the shots, and sometimes Coppola contrasted gold and yellowish colors with very striking blues. Characters also have very interesting costumes. The men usually dress in suits that are evocative of the styles of the mid-20th century. I mean, sometimes they're in tunics or togas or whatever, while the women seem to wear outfits that feel like a mix of classical Roman and modern fashion styles. The sets also have this kind of vibe as well. They feel like Coppola blended Art Deco and Roman aesthetics and placed them in our contemporary age. The result is that everything in the film feels both familiar and alien. What adds to this feeling is the writing and the performances. So much of the dialogue feels written. I know that most dialogue in movies is written, but when I say that it feels written, I mean that it generally makes sense in the scene, but it doesn't feel like something a person would say in real life. It felt like Coppola wanted the dialogue to feel more theatrical or Shakespearean in nature, as evidenced by Adam Driver quite literally delivering the entirety of the to be or not to be soliloquy from Hamlet early in the film. Now, there are parts that break from this mold. If you've been following the discussion of the film on Twitter, then you've probably seen the clip of Adam Driver saying,
So go back to the club.
Everyone burst out in laughter at this line reading in my theater because it's just so tonally different from the rest of the dialogue. It's also just really funny. This gets me to another major point about the movie. It's quite funny, especially if you watch it with a crowd. Some people think that it's unintentionally funny, and others are adamant that it's intentional. And you know what? I'm kind of with the latter group on this one. The acting choices are over the top and often quite campy. Shia LaBeouf moves around the scene like a court jester, and Aubrey Plaza more than fully embodies her femme fatale character. There's more to it than just the actors, though. Whenever Wow Platinum sticks one of her fingers out like this, there's this very distinct click in the sound design.
2. The bank is mine.
And so the sound design and the editing seem to highlight and expand upon the goofiness. I also think that it's just written to be funny and bizarre. While Platinum has this line where she says, "You're anal as hell, but I'm oral as hell," as she's positioning herself between Caesar's legs. So are the actors giving bad performances, or are their performances the only natural way to deliver the written dialogue? Who I didn't expect to give a funny performance was Jon Voight. If you've seen the movie, you know what scene I'm talking about. It's legitimately one of the funniest scenes I've seen in a movie all year. Speaking about how the acting is a bit over the top, subtlety? That is not a word the Megalopolis knows. It lays everything bare for you to see. We see CGI statues fall and die in the streets, representing America's ideals and institutions. The elites have orgiastic parties in the clubs, though Coppola's vision of degeneracy is basically just some girls kissing. It doesn't reach the depths of films like Cello, Liberté, Climax, Crash, or most recently, Infinity Pool. The ceremony of the Vestal Virgins quickly becomes a money-grabbing affair, with what's supposed to be a sacred event feeling more like a Super Bowl halftime show where rich people throw money at the girls. Claudio's sidekick quite literally has a black sun tattooed on his forehead, and there's this like swastika tree stump in a scene with the two of them. There's even a scene where a pop culture news commentator states that Claudio is probably sleeping with his sisters. Okay, great. We have a very clear picture of this guy. Coppola also shows Cicero working at a desk that's sinking into the sand. He's bogged down by the past, and the earth is slowly sucking him in. On the other hand, Caesar works at the top of a tower, and we often see him standing on a giant clock overlooking the whole city. Caesar is in the clouds, visionary, idealistic, while Cicero is on the ground, pragmatic, stubborn, and of a dying breed. The major theme in this movie is that of time. Caesar can stop time whenever he wants, and he gets that power from his muses, but time and the progression of it are what drives him to work. He sees this great civilization in decline and wishes to create his own utopia so that something can outlive him and outlive this civilization. Architecture, art, and beauty freeze time, but the artist cannot escape its march forward. Caesar's struggle with loss is what inspires him to create his most important work, and his fight against time, by loving someone else and having kids, that is what gives him the drive to complete his massive project. I want to point out that a film I thought a lot about while watching Megalopolis was Rumblefish. And that film came to mind because Lawrence Fishburne gives a monologue about time in Megalopolis that's very evocative of Tom Waits' monologue about time in Rumblefish.
Time is a very peculiar item. You see, when you're young, you're a kid, you got time, you got nothing but time.
I think that in this film, Coppola is reflecting on his age and on his own mortality. He's looking down at society from his tower and seeing it decline, while wanting to build something lasting and beautiful for this crumbling and divided civilization. Is his utopian project Megalopolis a metaphor for the film? I'm not quite sure, but I could definitely see that as a valid interpretation. I do think that Caesar is a bit of a self-insert for Coppola, and I have my suspicions about other characters being inspired by his friends, family, and enemies. So I think that as campy and as goofy and as bizarre as this film might be, it's Coppola reflecting on his life and work in his own honest and very personal way. That's the thing about this film. Even though it may be way out there in terms of the various choices made, from the dialogue to the costumes and sets and whatnot, there are no hints of that kind of smug irony that we've come to expect in modern movies. He's not winking at the camera and telling you that he knows that this is weird. He plays everything as straight as he can. You can watch it and think that he's out of touch, or dementia has finally gotten to his brain, or maybe he smoked way too much weed on set. But I don't think that it's fair to say that this film isn't a genuine expression from Coppola. And that's what makes it work for me in the end. You can call the film a mess, but it's an honest mess. And it makes me think that for a swan song, he's destroying cinema in front of our very eyes. He disregards traditional narratives in films and instead embraces episodic sequences and the carnivalesque spectacle that directors like Fellini loved. It's almost like every choice he made here was to make us aware of what goes into film. What is naturalistic dialogue? What is good acting? What is a film story? Why does a superpower matter if the character doesn't use it to do anything significant? I like to think that all of this was intentional, but I have no idea. And as for the utopian project of Megalopolis, I talked to Solar Sands a bit after he watched the film, and he told me that biomimicry is popular among young design students. He read the project as being a bit of a satire on designers in today's day and age, since Caesar's design for Utopia is not much different than an 18-year-old student's. But, you know, Coppola might just really be into biomimicry. Who knows? When I heard that the film was polarizing, I was expecting to love it or to hate it. I wasn't expecting for the film to polarize me. I both love it and hate it. This film is not something that I can give a rating. I mean, what do stars even matter for something like this? It's certainly one of the most interesting films I've seen in a long time, and I think that it's destined for cult classic status. I can see this film becoming the subject of study for students, video essayists, filmmakers, and critics alike. Everyone I know who has seen it, they can't stop talking about it, whether they loved it or hated it. And I love that. I love movies that inspire spirited conversations. The film might be just under 2.5 hours long, but I got at least 10 hours of enjoyment just this past weekend from discussing it with my buddies. If you're on the fence about seeing it, I don't know if I can recommend it to you. I will say that it's best to watch it with a crowd, so try to see it with other people if you can. Personally, I'm glad I saw this on IMAX with a pretty large crowd, and I think it's special to see a work by a legendary director like Coppola on as big a screen as possible, whether you like the film or not. These new Hollywood directors, they're getting old, and I'm afraid that many of them don't have much time left in this world. So I want to support and cherish anything they still have to give us. And when it's a passion project about the fall of the Roman Republic, but set in a sort of sci-fi world that Coppola's been trying to make for 40 years, then you know that I was there at the cinema as soon as I could see it. It might be overstuffed and the product of decades of rewrites, but I like films that swing for the fences as boldly as Megalopolis. Now, since this is the end of the video, I will say that the end title screen of Megalopolis is kind of cringe. It's a new Pledge of Allegiance that reads, "I pledge allegiance to our human family and to all the species that we protect. One earth, indivisible, with long life, education, and justice for all." Anyways, guys, I hope you liked this review. I've been the Kino Corner, and I will see you all in the next video. Also, if you watched all the way to the end, why don't you put that new Pledge of Allegiance in the comments?
You find me cruel, selfish, and unfeeling? I am. I work without caring what happens to others. So go back to the club